It was considered the biggest break in the case of the Boston Strangler. Detective Phil DiNatale had zeroed in on Albert DeSalvo as the prime suspect in the case. At the time, DeSalvo was already behind bars at Bridgewater State Hospital, accused in a series of sexual assaults. DeSalvo was awaiting trial for a series of sexual assaults in which he conned his way into women's apartments, claiming to be either a maintenance man or a scout looking for models.
He'd say, I'm from Stars and Stripes, and we're spending $40 an hour for models. Are you interested in it? If you are, I'd like to measure you. And then those who allowed him to be measured, usually he ended up either raping or voluntarily having sex with.
Once busted, it was clear DeSalvo would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Phil DiNatale, that wasn't enough. He wanted the time and resources to prove DeSalvo wasn't just a rapist, he was a serial killer. He wanted a conviction for all the murders. But a hotshot lawyer named F. Lee Bailey would deprive DiNatale and the public of a clear victory. Bailey had gotten a tip from a client named George Nasser, who was also doing time at Bridgewater, that a guy named DeSalvo might be the Strangler.
Mr. Bailey went down to Bridgewater and talked to George Nasser, and at the same time he asked the guys to bring Albert DeSalvo up. Now he wasn't representing DeSalvo. He didn't sign in to see DeSalvo, but he talked to DeSalvo.
Within days, DeSalvo had confessed to Bailey he was the Strangler, making Bailey look like the hero. Phil DiNatale and his associates on the task force were not pleased.
We were working on Albert Hicks DeSalvo 3 months prior to Bailey ever knew about him. And Bailey going around saying he found it, that's what upsets me, and that's what gives me a cancer. And I've had it ever since, that when he gets on TV and he blows the balloon up and say that he is the man that found the Boston Strangler. Well, I just want this to be on record, and this is the truth, so help me God, that we had him first.
Everybody wanted the credit for catching the Strangler.
Today, F. Lee Bailey, the superstar attorney who jetted around the world for decades, lives a quiet life in Maine. At the age of 79, he remembers every detail of the Strangler case, including a controversial interrogation in which he quizzed DeSalvo about the facts.
I had talked to the Boston police. I said, give me a couple of things that would be relevant here that the press never got, but you guys have, and they did. And what they wanted to know was, is just another nut who read the papers and is making up a story, or does he know things only the killer should know? And their first impression was, he's got some awful good answers.
Even though DeSalvo did confess, investigators continued to work feverishly trying to prove the case with facts. Unfortunately, their boss, Attorney General Ed Brooke, was politically not inclined to pursue a murder conviction.
That we only have information which does not amount to evidence, and information is not a basis for the return of an indictment or even presentation before a grand jury. It is far premature to talk about indictments at this stage of the development of this case.
For the Attorney General's office, it was enough to just nail Albert for the B&E and put him away for life without any murder conviction. But this wasn't enough for Phil. Phil and the task force transcribed Albert's confessions and cross-referenced them with anything that was written in the arrest reports, anything that was in the crime scene photographs, anything that was printed in the newspapers, and only things the killer could know. What would these days be thought of as an Excel spreadsheet was then called the diagram of death.
The question that everybody was asking, why did DeSalvo confess?
He knew he would never get out, even though he hadn't been convicted of any murders. He wanted to wind up in a hospital and not a prison or a place like Bridgewater, which does not deserve the word hospital. And he wanted to provide for his family, and he thought if he wrote a book about what he had done, that he could provide for his family.
DeSalvo sold his story to author Gerald Frank and did receive a royalty of about $30,000. But the most dramatic episode of Albert DeSalvo's career came in 1967, just after he'd been sentenced to life in prison.
An escape from this mental institute in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. For the inmate who broke out of his cell and freed two cronies is Albert DeSalvo, who says he is the Boston Strangler.
DeSalvo knew he would be caught eventually, which he reveals in a letter written to his prison warden the night of his escape.
I truly thought I was doing the right thing by telling the truth. Each day that goes by, it seems to me to be a waste of time to be living. I'm not going out to hurt anyone. I just wish to die outside these walls. I know they will have orders to shoot me on sight. I can't understand myself, so how can I expect you or anyone else to understand what made me be? Everything I am, I hate, and almost can't believe it was me.
DeSalvo remained at large for just over a day, eventually surrendering after a massive manhunt. After the escape, he was sent to the maximum security prison at Walpole, where he was to serve a life sentence after being found guilty in a series of sexual attacks. His descriptions of the murders had several discrepancies, so many, in fact, that some wonder, was DeSalvo really the Strangler? That question next.